Welcome into another episode of the Swamp 247 podcast. My name's Jacob Rudner alongside Swamp 247 staff writer Graham Hall. And Graham, we have a very special episode of the Swamp 247 podcast today. It is prediction day. We're going to go through a list of questions that you and I have created for ourselves. We're going to answer them, get into some of the weeds here on some of these predictions. We're going to talk stats. We're going to talk leaders. Just some things to get people ready for the season, which gets going in just a couple days. We're recording this on Tuesday, August 30th. Florida, of course, starts its season on September 3rd against Utah at home. That's a tough game. But I say we jump right into it. We got a whole list of things to do, much to get through. And we're going to go by position in a way. I think that people will eventually see. Defensively, we are going to go through some more broad strokes predictions, whereas offensively, we did break it down by position group. And we're going to start our process here with the quarterback room. We're going to talk a little bit of Anthony Richardson. I'm curious from you, first and foremost, does Anthony Richardson throw for more than 2,500 passing yards this season? Why or why not? Let's just get right into it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's break it all down right now. I think that Richardson, a lot of people are expecting him to have this huge season from play standard, highlight standard in a sense here. But will he have the statistical numbers that are going to warrant that first round projection that I think a lot of people are looking for from him? That's I think a really huge question that Florida is going to answer when the season opens on Saturday. I'm thinking that Richardson could have a season where he throws for more than 2,500 yards. I'm going to go with yes, he does on this one. I think that he is a capable quarterback, and that's just an average a little bit more than 200 yards per game. And I think that is certainly possible, even though we do know that Billy Napier is going to establish a run-heavy offense here in Gainesville. I think that absolutely you will see Richardson have games of 200 passing yards or more. Whether he's reaching the heights of Kyle Trask from a few seasons ago of 400-yard passing games, I don't know. Those are records at Florida, after all, for a reason here. And I just think that tempering expectations, knowing what Napier's bringing in, and knowing that this is a guy who, while he is certainly very talented in the starting quarterback, I think there are questions still that he has to answer. And whether he's going to go out there and have put up these huge numbers right off the bat, I think is another huge question. He may eventually by the end of the season, but these first couple of games, especially considering the opponent, could result in him kind of coming along a little bit here and gradually progressing.
Yeah, I think that's fair. This is one that I struggled with when we started playing this game. I should add, though, we are doing this, and I actually probably should have prefaced this with you earlier before the show, but we'll do it on air with everybody. We are going to include all games. So if Florida plays a bowl game in college football, that does count towards a player's season stats. They do not cap it off at the end of the regular season. So if Florida gets to a bowl game this year and Anthony Richardson needs a little bump to achieve one of our statistical markers, it does count. And with that in mind, I think he does pass 2,500 yards. I'm in agreement with you. Say Florida does not reach a bowl game in 12 contests in the regular season to hit 2,500 yards. Anthony Richardson would have to average basically just over 208 yards a week. I think that's well within reason. I would say that the primary factor in us setting the 2,500 number, in my opinion at least, is that we think Florida is going to run the ball a whole bunch, up to 60% of the time, perhaps even more. They have 4 very good running backs. Anthony Richardson himself is a runner, which is our next category, actually. But, for those reasons, I think that 2,500 was a good over-under number. Of course, anybody listening to this on, especially on YouTube, if you want to comment your predictions, we welcome you to do that. But I'm going to go, yes, Anthony Richardson does achieve more than 2,500 passing yards, but what will he do as a runner? That is the next question. Anthony Richardson over under 700 rushing yards on the season. Graham, I will send it to you first, obviously. What is your prediction here? Over under 700 on the ground.
I am going to go over. I do think that 700 is definitely doable. You have a guy last year in Emory Jones, who in a different offense, of course, was able to produce numbers like that. He had a little over 750 rushing yards last year in Florida's offense. And I think that while that really kind of can be considered a benchmark in a sense, I think that if we are going to see Florida use their running backs as much as Napier and Coach Jaluk have alluded to, maybe that does cut down the amount of designed runs for a quarterback. And of course, I think no one certainly is predicting the possibility of broken plays that require Richardson to take off running, get outside the pocket, and try and make something happen. But with that said, I do think that 700 plus yards is definitely doable for him this season. Even though, he only had 401 last year. It was in a reserve role. I think you're going to see him just achieve that. Florida fans saw him take off on a couple very lengthy runs, that 70-plus yard run he had early in the season. And, you get a couple of those and you make up ground pretty quickly, not to use a pun there. But I think that with him, you're going to see him have more than 700 yards. And that gives him 3,000 total plus yards on the season if both of those predictions do ring true, which in my mind is an extremely successful campaign for a quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Anthony Richardson is due for at least 700 rushing yards. If you look back to last year, Emory Jones finished his season with 758 rushing yards. He averaged 5.3 yards per carry and scored 4 touchdowns. Just with everything we know about how Billy Napier doesn't seem to have any plans to limit Anthony Richardson's rushing attack. It was something that he said has to be a part of Florida's identity, which is a very big thing to try and make a single characteristic of one player a part of your overall identity. I don't think Florida has any plans to limit him in that regard. I think that this offense suits Anthony Richardson really well. It's going to go to play actions. There will be, read option type things, I think, throughout the season, especially with a guy with Anthony Richardson's athleticism at the quarterback position. I think that Florida would be remiss to not take advantage. And 700 rushing yards at the end of the day, especially if you spread that over 13 games, you're talking about averaging just over 50 yards per game. And I think that that's absolutely something that, given his athleticism and his potency as a runner, that he should be able to do. Let's talk about some scoring production here. Anthony Richardson, 20 and a half passing touchdowns is the number you and I set. For context, Emory Jones threw 19 touchdowns last year against 13 interceptions. I think, interestingly, though, Florida as a whole, and yes, Trent Whittemore is a part of this number, Florida as a whole threw for 27 touchdowns last season. So certainly within possibility that he goes well over the 20 and a half mark, but we decided to set it at this point just because we didn't want to overdo it. Where is Anthony Richardson? Are you going 3 straight overs? You thinking it's an under on this one? 20 and a half passing touchdowns.
Yeah, I am going to go with over, especially because I think it's difficult to see a guy pass for over 2,500 yards and then not have 20 plus touchdowns to back that up. I think that, both of those things have to be true in my mind, or else it's not really, it's indicative of someone who's not really taking advantage of red zone opportunities, or there's maybe an issue there. And Florida has talked about making sure that they maximize red zone opportunities, or maybe it is a sign that Florida is going to pound the ball and run it when they get inside the 10-yard line, 20-yard line. I think you could see that a lot more this season rather than these, passing opportunities that kind of, I think, increase your turnover margin, your risk for, causing turnovers inside the red zone. And so I think with 4 capable runners and also a starting quarterback who's going to run, you could see those touchdown numbers cut down a little bit from a passing perspective. But I do think that Richardson's going to have more than 20. I don't know if he has more than 25, but I certainly think that 20 is a doable number. But a lot of this is going to come down to the split of their play calling here. And we could see a lot more runs than we have been thinking. And a lot of people have been believing are going to be possible from this team. They really have not given too much. You and I have written about this, but they haven't given too much when it comes to divulging much about the offensive split and philosophy and play calling, and how much guys like Richardson, who again are coming off of a lower body injury that limited his mobility, how much he's going to be used in the run game, knowing that he's been injured before, and the quarterback situation behind him, having lost Jack Miller is a little bit more dicey. Does that affect how much he's being used in the run game? It may lead him to be more of a passing quarterback than many people are believing right now that they would like to even use him at, if that makes sense. So I think that 20 plus passing touchdowns, given all the circumstances, is extremely doable for Anthony Richardson this season.
This is going to be my first hot take. I'm going to go with under on 20 and a half, and I'm actually going to give an exact number. I think he throws for 20 touchdowns on the nose. The reason I'm going to go under on 20 and a half is because I think a lot of Florida's touchdown production is going to come from rushing in the red zone. I think that Florida is going to put itself in a situation where it will make more sense, given its overall team strengths, given its offensive line, given the fact that it has 4 serviceable running backs that will allow you to offer different looks. I think a lot of Florida's scoring production will come from its ground game. And that could be Anthony Richardson. I think that, we just talked about over under 700 rushing yards on the season. Do I think some of those long, maybe touchdown runs could be from the quarterback? I certainly do. And I think all of that contributes to, obviously, fewer opportunities to throw for scores. And I think that for that reason alone, Anthony Richardson finishes his season with 20 passing touchdowns. It would be the same number of touchdowns, I should add, that Levi Lewis, the former quarterback at the University of Louisiana under Billy Napier, he threw for 20 touchdowns in his final season as the only starter for the Ragin' Cajuns. So I'm going to go under. That's the first time you and I have disagreed. We'll see if we do it again. Let's talk about rushing touchdowns. 6.5 is the line that I have set. This is not a category you and I talked about before the show, but I have now added it to the repertoire. Let's go real quick here. 6.5, Florida last year. Anthony Richardson and Emory Jones combined for 7. So does Anthony Richardson by himself match or exceed that total, or does he stay 6 or under?
Oh man, I'm tempted again to go over. I kind of feel like I'm that's 4 straight in a sense for me. So I am a little bit hesitant just from there, but I think that his physique, his size for the position makes him ideal to be used in quarterback design runs. We all know that, especially in a sneak scenario. And people have also seen that he has the speed to take off, get out in the open field, make defenders miss, and, house touchdowns, whether he's, 70 yards out or 40 yards out. So when I think of Anthony Richardson, I think he's a guy that has, short yardage ability and, the ability to have this dynamic plays. So I think that I'm going to go over is what I'm saying here. I think that when you factor all that in, that's a lot of stuff that you can't really game plan for. What Richardson has done in the past, and not necessarily saying that this is precedent by any means, but what we've seen already is that he can score outside of the design plays, whether that's due to the pocket collapsing or it's due to him just, making a decision, hurdling a defender, getting out in the open field, and turning a short yardage play into a lengthy touchdown. I think that he's able to do both of those things, and that's going to lead to, I think, possibly double-digit rushing touchdowns this year.
That would be quite the season if Anthony Richardson can rush for double-digit touchdowns. I will agree with you on one aspect of what you're saying. I don't necessarily think that it's 10 or more, but I do think it is higher than 6.5 rushing touchdowns. So I will also go over. I think that 7, 8, maybe 9 range for rushing touchdowns for Richardson is a really reasonable mark. I think that part of that has to do with Florida's running potency overall. I think that there could be less a need for him to have to scramble and try and create production with his legs if Florida's ground game gets going the way that I think you and I believe Florida might try and get it going. And that, again, is like with the passing touchdowns. I think that could prove somewhat limiting. Although, if you're going to go over 6.5 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback, that is a great season potentially. Let's talk about a negative category, though. We've done a lot of positive. Just to recap quickly, we've done passing yards, rushing yards, passing touchdowns. And rushing touchdowns for Florida's starting quarterback, Anthony Richardson. Let's talk turnovers, though. Anthony Richardson, interceptions. We set this number, I actually think this is kind of high, which should elude to what my answer will be. But we have set the number at 9.5 interceptions. I'm curious what your take is. I will also remind the audience that if you are to go under here, it would be your first under of the show, and we are through 4 categories.
Oof, this is a tough one, man. I mean, I think that 9 interceptions, if that's all that Florida throws all season, I think there are a lot of people that would take that, especially when you consider that Florida had twice that many last year. And while that was one of the worst in all of FBS Division I football, I think that expecting this massive jump may be a tall task. And this is not to criticize Anthony Richardson, who I think if you've been watching this and listening, you have a understanding that I have a great amount of respect for his talent and especially who he is as a person. But this year in a larger role, whether he's able to cut down on the turnovers, facing these tough defenses every single week in the SEC, I could see him having an interception a game. In a sense, I think that's absolutely a possibility. And that kind of is just the nature of the beast sometimes here in the conference. It's not always indicative of a quarterback's talent level. Sometimes it's the defense's prowess. So I think that I'm going to go with over, but just slightly. I could see 10 interceptions, maybe 11. And I still think that for a quarterback who had 5 last year, right, in a very limited role, to only have 11 when or 10 when their targets are going to jump tenfold in their usage. If he's able to, even if the interceptions happen, if he's able to avoid fumbling at a high rate, not to kind of segue here, but if he's able to take care of the ball as a runner in this offense, and the interceptions just, sometimes that happens when they go off your receiver's hand and pop up in the air, and they're not always, like I said, indicative of a quarterback's talent level or capabilities. I could see a way where he has, double-digit interceptions and it not being necessarily a bad thing. But I would like to eat crow on this one. Call me a downer on Anthony Richardson all you want, but I would like to eat a little crow at the end of the season if he comes in here with single-digit turnovers.
All right, so Graham goes over. For the sake of time, I'm going to be brief here. I think that 9.5 is a big number. I think Anthony Richardson will certainly get picked off. I don't think it's double-digit times. I think that he's able to keep it into the single-digit range. I'll guess either 8 or 9 interceptions, so I'm going under. And it brings me to our next position group. We're talking about the running backs. This is a unit that we project, and I think many fans do as well, to be very, very heavily used this season. Could be as much as, in that low 60s% of the time range. Billy Napier has a history of running the ball. But interestingly, Florida has 4 running backs it views as serviceable. It might name a starter. We project that to be Naquan Wright. But we don't think that makes much a difference, that he's the starter. We think everybody gets involved in this room. And that is the reason for the first question of this section. And that is, who leads the team in rushing yards? I don't think that this is clear-cut at all, but I'm curious who your take is on the rushing leader. And we can include Anthony Richardson. I will say that. So if you feel as though Anthony Richardson's over 700 yards, as we both said, is the most Florida gets, then that is acceptable. But I will. The floor is yours.
This is a good question, certainly. I am tempted to go with Richardson, and I certainly see a path to Richardson being the leading rusher, but I'm kind of going to go with a bold one here, and I'm going to go with Montrell Johnson as Florida's leading rusher. I do think Naquan Wright is going to play a large role in this offense. I think people are forgetting how good he is as a pass-catching back. And he's also, I think, extremely skilled in pass pro and really hasn't spent a lot of time in fall camp, having to do a whole lot in that regard, as he's kind of been brought along slowly. But he has been, when he's on the field, showing why he was even used last year behind guys who were in the NFL, and Dameon Pierce and Malik Davis. So I do think that Naquan, like I said, is going to play a large role. This is no disrespect to him, but I'm going to go with Montrell Johnson. I think that basically what he did at Louisiana, his familiarity with the staff, their trust in him in an in-game scenario, even though it was in the Sun Belt, that's going to, I think, lead to him having the designation as maybe being the safe choice at running back. If someone fumbles or someone is not able to establish themselves in between the trenches and get out in the open field and isn't making the right moves, I think that, Montrell is going to be a guy that the staff looks to first as getting into the game. And I think that given his status as someone who can run between the tackles, you are going to see him used a lot this season. And I'm going to go with him as being Florida's leading rusher.
I like the pick. I especially like how bold the pick is, and I will follow suit with a different name. I'm going to go with the freshman. I'm going to go Trevor Etienne to lead the team in rushing yards, and I will tell you why. I have heard nothing but good things about this guy. It sounds like he is an advanced running back for his age. It sounds like he has very good patience. He knows how to let a play develop in front of him. He has an eye for setting up offensive linemen, making sure that blocks go before he goes. And I think that is super important. I think that the level of respect that he has built up for himself in a really short time. This is a summer enrollee who has done the majority of his impressing over the course of a month in fall camp. To me, that is very impressive. I think that this is a guy who just ends up taking over the unit. I do think guys like Montrell Johnson, Lingard and Naquan Wright, I think they're all talented. I think this guy is just going to take he's going to steal the show. So my first player bold prediction is that Trevor Etienne leads the team in rushing yards. Now, my question to you is, are you sticking with the same guy, Montrell Johnson, to lead the team in rushing touchdowns? Again, Anthony Richardson is in play.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Richardson here on this
Wow.
one. I think that just his ability in short yardage situations, I think that his ability to create outside of the play, his dynamic play capability, all those things of all the guys that we've mentioned, the 4 running backs and the quarterback, he's obviously going to be on the field the most. So I think that he has the most potential to score the most rushing touchdowns this season. So I'm going to go with him. Maybe that's not seen as a safe bet in your mind, but I'm thinking that he's going to end up having the most rushing touchdowns for this team this season.
All right. I'm going to go with Montrell Johnson. I'm going to go with your first pick. I think his ability to run inside the tackles, his physicality will benefit him in goal line scenarios. I can see that being his role in a crowded room. Somebody who's going to go and rush in between the tackles and pick up hard-fought yards. That bodes well in short yardage scoring situations. And I think that is why Johnson is my pick. I will say this, though. My second place pick is probably Anthony Richardson for a variety of reasons. I think you outlined them perfectly, so I will just leave it to your explanation and move on to the next question, which is the number of 600-yard rushers on this Florida team. I will exclude Anthony Richardson from this because we've already talked about how you and I both believe that he will rush for over 700 yards, which automatically includes him here. Let's talk running backs, though. There are 4 scholarship running backs. We expect all of them to participate. Louisiana last year had 3 600-yard rushers for reference. What is your number and why?
600 is an interesting number. I'm going to go with 3, and here's who I'm thinking. Obviously, Richardson, Johnson, and then I'm going to agree with you that I believe Trevor Etienne is going to have more than 600 rushing yards this season. I do think he's going to come in third in the pecking order, but I do think he's going to finish above Wright and Lingard in that regard. And even though I think Wright could lead the unit in receiving yards, I think Etienne's going to have more rushing yards than him this season. So I'm going to go with 3.
I'm going to go with 2. I think that this is a good unit, like we've said now in several different podcasts. I think that they have a couple potent guys in there. But I do think as the season goes on, they start to realize that there are probably 1 or 2 guys who stand out from the rest of the group. And those 2 guys start to get the lion's share of the carries. And the 2 who I think will do it, I'm going to go with Naquan Wright and Trevor Etienne. I think Montrell Johnson is just shy of that 600 yard mark, excuse me, I think I end up regretting this pick. I think Johnson actually probably gets there, but for now, I'm going to go with 2. Who leads the room in receiving yards, though? So we've done rushing yards. We've done how many over 600 rushing yards. Is there a notable pass catcher among this quartet of running backs, and who will it be, in your opinion?
In out of the running backs in terms of receiving yards?
Out of the running backs in terms of receiving yards.
I got to go with Naquan Wright then. I've been repping him all along as being Florida's best pass catching back. I obviously am a little bit tempted to go with ETN here, but I'm going to go with Naquan Wright. I've seen it time and time again. He's great on wheel routes, and I think that he's looked good, coming out of the flat, and he's a guy who, you really don't know what he's going to do when he's out there at times, and I think that is going to contribute to him being the leading receiving back in this team, and they just trust him. I think his veteran leadership, again, is going to, I think, lead to them trusting a running back to be an option in the receiving game this year.
And you know what? I will give it no further explanation. I agree with you on the name. I agree with you on the reasoning. I'm going with Naquan Wright. Let's talk more about receiving, though. Let's go to the category of receiving yards in general. I want to talk about who is going to lead this team in total receiving yards, and I will use this opportunity quickly also as a plug for some of our own work. If you are following us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you can get your audio-only content, then you will have probably seen that we are also, at the same time as this podcast, releasing a series of shows about each position group on Florida's roster, where we break down what each group has and does not have in terms of strengths and weaknesses. We talk about depth chart. We get into the weeds on each position group specifically, one per episode. And we're almost all the way through that. Yesterday, being Monday, August 29th, we released one about the wide receivers, and we actually did some predictions in that podcast. So make sure you check that out. Give it a listen. We can put a link to it on the screen now for you on YouTube if that's where you're watching. But Graham, I'm going to send it to you. Receiving yards leader, who and why?
I'm going to go with Ricky Pearsall. Even though I think there are some concerns about how healthy he is heading into this opener and his availability, at times throughout fall camp was non-existent. Let's call it that. I think that he has the most dynamic play potential in this offense. I think that he can take the top off. He can do a lot of really good things for this team. And the trust, kind of the same point I just made about Naquan Wright, the trust between him and the coaching staff is very evident in my mind. And I think that that's going to lead him to be the leading receiver for this Florida team this season.
I love it because we're going to keep it quick. We're going to keep it moving. I agree with you. I think Ricky Pearsall, despite being the newcomer, is the standout guy in the unit. And that is in spite of him hardly participating in fall camp, as you said. Suffered that double bone bruise in his foot, held him out for the majority of camp. I don't think it makes a bit of difference. I think that this guy is dynamic. I think that he adds an element to this receiving room that doesn't exist without him. And for that reason, he ends up becoming target number one and leads the team in receiving yards. Yeah, that's my reasoning there. Let's talk receiving touchdowns, though. Are you sticking with Ricky in that category? If so, why? And also give me a reason if you're going to change it up.
Yeah, I am going to go with him. Just his ability in short yardage situations. Even though I do think Florida's going to run the ball a lot of the time when they get down into the red zone, I think that he still is the best option if you are going to choose to throw it. I know that Justin Shorter, his size makes him kind of an appealing guy to have him just, be a guy who can go up there and get it when Florida needs to just throw it up in the back of the end zone. But I do think that Ricky, his combination of agility, footwork, the trust, like I mentioned, that's going to lead him to being the number one go-to target, whether they're in the red zone, whether they're on a big play, whether, wherever he is coming out of the backfield, even. I think that it's going to be Pearsall who has a chance to be the guy who leads this team in receiving touchdowns.
So this is an interesting little situation I have. I don't remember who I said on our wide receivers podcast yesterday, so this could be a completely different answer. I will leave it to our subscribers to hold me accountable. I am going to say Justin Shorter on receiving touchdowns. I believe that's who I said during the wide receiver podcast as well. And you outlined the reasons. I like his height. I think his athleticism in red zone scenarios ends up proving beneficial in this statistical category. I like Ricky potentially to do it as well. But for me, it comes down to the size advantage and the ability potentially to throw a ball up and have a receiver go get it. I would trust my 6'4" wide receiver over my 6'1" wide receiver if I had to pick. And for that reason, I'm going Justin Shorter. The last receiving category, who leads in total receptions? Does Ricky get the trifecta for you?
I am tempted to choose a guy that we haven't mentioned, like Dante Sanders or possibly Justin Shorter, but I am going to go with Ricky, and I kind of laid it out there already. He's going to be a guy who's going to be used in short yardage scenarios a lot of the time, and I think that he just provides you with, as a guy in the slot that can do a lot of things. He's going to be used a lot of the time, and I think that that's just going to result in him being the guy that leads in receptions.
Okay. I'm going Ricky. I think that with yards comes volume. I think that he runs a variety of routes very well. And I think that, very simply put, that is what allows him to lead the team in total receptions. That will do it for the wide receiver category, but we're going to briefly talk tight ends. Give me, in one fell swoop, who leads in all three of those categories among Florida's tight ends? Again, that's receiving yards leader, receiving touchdowns, and receptions. If you want to just rattle off all three categories, you can go for it.
I'm going to go with Dante Sanders for all three. I think that his combination of technique, his frame, ideal frame, his physicality at the position, his knowledge, being a 3D guy for this team, I think that that's going to result in him just being the number one option, and that's going to result in the production. So I'm going to go with Dante Sanders, which is, again, we talked about this on the preview, just quite a surprise for someone who was looking to depart Gainesville and had been used as kind of this multi-tool fill-in Band-Aid, if you will, even at times in this room, and now is going to be your number one option in an offense that is going to, very similar to how often they're going to use the running backs, are always going to have one, if not two, tight ends on the field at all times. So it's a huge role for Sanders, and I think that he's going to surprise a lot of people and also produce from a receiving standpoint as well.
I'm with you. Nothing else to say, really. I think that Dante Sanders is the guy in all of those categories that are going to show up on a stat sheet. I think Zipper is probably your guy if you needed to take your bet of who's going to do a better job in a blocking scenario. I personally would put Keon Zipper on the field. As far as receiving yards, touchdowns, and receptions go, I'm trusting tight end one to get the job done. That's Dante Sanders. Let's move to the offensive line. This is a very brief category, but I think an important one. Last year, Florida allowed just 14 sacks. Tremendous performance from the offensive line. This year, you and I are wondering, do they repeat? So over under 14 and a half sacks allowed. Are they going to match or improve, or are they going to be slightly worse?
This is a tough one, I think, because I think that while the overall offensive line play is going to be better this season, I think that that's something that I think a lot of people, not just myself, are expecting this year. I do think that the play calling and how defenses are going to look to compete with Florida and line up with Florida is going to allow for a scenario where there is an increase in sacks. I am hesitant still to predict it, but I got to go ahead and just say that, yeah, I think that they're going to have more than 14 and a half sacks this season, strictly for what they're asking Richardson to do and how, like I said, teams are going to line up against them. And the play calling for Florida as well, the use of play action, even I think that is going to result in an increase in sacks this year. But hey, if you're averaging 1-2 sacks per game, I don't really think that to use this word again, is an indictment of the talent level of your offensive line in any sense, or your quarterback's ability to read the defense and make the good decision and throw it away.
I think that that's fair. I am also going to go over, and I think that the point you made about play calling is really important. I think that this offense is going to put the offensive line in a position where it's going to be constantly trying to protect a quarterback who will be moving frequently. This is not a guy, even on plays where he doesn't cross the line of scrimmage, to potentially make a run. I think Anthony Richardson's legs are involved quite heavily on every pass play. I think that he is the kind of guy who's going to move around, who can buy himself extra time by moving around behind the line of scrimmage. I think that he's the kind of guy who frequently rolls out of the pocket entirely to try and create some space for himself on play actions. And I think that when that happens, by nature, it makes it more difficult for an offensive line to defend against. I think that when you have a quarterback who's moving and your offensive linemen are not looking at the quarterback, they don't know where he's going. The defense has that benefit of being able to see where he's moving and being able to adjust while the offensive line's back is to the quarterback. And I think that the result of that is occasionally more sacks. I also would agree with you, though, that I think that this is a unit that has the potential to be very strong for Florida. I think, as a matter of fact, I think it could be Florida's best unit or one of its best units when all is said and done at the end of the season. Still, I think that 14.5 number is a pretty safe bet for the over. And the last offensive line category, yards per carry. Last year, Florida was fantastic in this statistic, well over 5 yards per carry. We set the number at 5 to not overdo it. Also, given the volume of run, that number could go down in Napier's offense. But I will give you the mic. What is your prediction on over under 5 yards per carry?
Whew, this is a good one. I'm going to go with over, slightly over. I know that last year at Louisiana, it was right under 5. And that, like you said, that was, I think, a testament to the high volume of run plays. And I think that even though fans were of the opinion that Florida didn't run the ball enough last year, the consensus in Gainesville was that when Florida did run it, they had capable rushers and that they should run it more often. I think that when you do have a tendency to run and the opposing team is expecting run, that is going to lead to a slightly lower success rate at times and therefore a slightly lower average. So I am going to go with over 5, but I do think that, I'm telling people right now, expect a little bit of a dip in effectiveness of every single run play, because that was something that you did see last year. When Florida did run it, it was pretty successful. And there's going to be some times where the opposing defense blows the play up.
That, I think, is a fair point. I think Florida exceeds the 5. I think it's close. I think that it's not like, I'm not talking 5.5 or anywhere over 5.5. I'm thinking like 5.2, 5.3, maybe 5.4 yards per rush. And that would be a great season. Let me just be clear. I think that over 5 is great. If you can rely on your running backs to pick up basically half of the yardage to move the chains, that's a big deal. So I think that Florida's in a good spot with that. And I won't say much more than that. I think it's an easy over. Let's move to defense, Graham. Let's talk sacks. Florida has a couple guys, I think, who could be potent in this category. You're talking Javon Dexter, Brenton Cox. I think even Ventrell Miller could be a factor in the race to who leads the team in sacks. Then you got a couple sneaky guys. Princey Uman-Mielen, I hope I said his name right, and Justice Boone maybe is another sneaky guy that you could pick. But without further ado, your sacks leader for the 2022 Florida season.
Yeah, I'm going to go Brenton Cox. I think that given his history, his level of talent, and his role in this defense, even though there is going to be the chance that he is going to drop more into coverage rather than rush the passer, I do think that you are going to see this be a guy who consistently wins his one-on-one matchups, gets to the quarterback and sacks the quarterback. If not, is credited for half a sack there when he combines with one of these other defensive linemen. I'm going to go with Brenton Cox. I just think that you also, we don't say it here, but this guy who had a very productive season last year and he wasn't even fully healthy for the majority of it. So I think that given that now he is back and healthy and in a new scheme that I think is going to help him a little bit more, free him up even a little bit more, you're going to see him have a better season, and I'm going to go with him.
I'm gonna echo you. I think that this is a guy who has the potential to be a very high NFL draft pick. I think that this is a guy who could be in the conversation for sacks leaders in the SEC overall, and that is in spite of the added coverage responsibility in Patrick Toney's defense. with playing that hybrid role, jack linebacker, where you could end up covering the flat, dropping back into a man assignment even. But I still think that Cox off the edge ends up being dominant. So I think he leads the Gators in sacks. Let's talk picks. Who leads the Gators in interceptions this year? I think, like the sacks category, this is one that could go in a number of different directions.
Oof. I was thinking Jason Marshall. That at first glance, you'd think opportunity, skill, all right there. I kind of want to go with a surprising candidate, though, and go with Jalen Kimber, just
Wow.
because we've seen his potential. I just wonder if he's going to have a very elevated role. I know that in the spring game, he was someone working his way back, and he didn't necessarily have a chance to run with the first team defense at times. And then at that other, corner spot, they have worked in a variety of guys, whether it's Avery Helm, Jordan Young, even, and Kimber may not be the number one guy right there, but just his ability to come up with interceptions, his nose for the football. I even thought about Trey Dean here in this one, but I kind of want to go with a crazy pick in Jalen Kimber, just based on his talent level. I think that he has a chance to do it. This may look like a crazy pick at the end of the year when he maybe isn't the starting corner like he would like to be, but there's a lot of talent in that room. Devin Moore too, even a guy that I think that you can't rule out as being a potential candidate. So, but I'm going to go with a crazy pick and go with Jalen Kimber. I'm interested to see where you're thinking though.
Yeah, you and I have been in agreement on a lot of categories. For those of you who are wondering why I keep looking down away from the camera, if you're watching this, it's because I'm actually writing down all of our predictions. So at some point later on in the year, there can be some either crow eaten or some accountability held for these predictions. I on my page see a lot of agreement between the two of us recently. I will disagree with you for the first time in a while. I'm going Jason Marshall. I think that he's cornerback one. I think even though we didn't really see him perform throughout the fall, we understand that was throughout. That was a byproduct of precaution. It was a minor hamstring injury that Florida felt there was no need to risk re-aggravating, especially because they knew that this would be the number one guy at the position no matter what. They didn't need to learn anything. They felt he was ready. It was safe to be safe. And I think that now that the season is upon us, I think that this is a guy who ends up being just fine from a health standpoint. And because of his talent, I think he leads the team in that category. Who do you think leads the team in tackles this season? I think, again, this is an area that you can go several directions in. It could be even somebody who plays along the defensive front. Brenton Cox would be a very reasonable pick. It wouldn't surprise me if it was either of Florida's starting two middle linebackers, but I will say no more. Where are you headed here?
Yeah, I was a little bit tempted to go with Trey Dean in this one, a guy who had 90 plus tackles last year, led Florida in that regard. But I am going to go with Ventrell Miller. I do think that he is proven. He had it, the title of Florida's leading tackler a couple seasons ago before he got injured. He was in on double-digit tackles all the time in Florida's competitions. Whether he is going to be in a position where he is the top tackler, I do think that remains to be seen in this defense, but I'm going to go with Ventrell Miller. I just think he makes the most sense. And he also is a very skilled player. That cannot be, I think, overshadowed when it comes to his ability to pick up the ball carrier and make the tackle. He's a very sound tackler as well, of course. So I'm going to go with Ventrell Miller here.
See, I'm hesitant to go with Ventrell Miller, and it's not because I don't think he's super talented. It's not because I don't think anything. I really don't think anything negative of him. I think that my biggest concern is his health. Last year, obviously, he suffered a season-ending injury very early on in his campaign. He has, led Florida in tackles in his career, but we saw a lot of black non-contact for Ventrell Miller throughout fall camp. And there has been no indication that he is unhealthy, but I do wonder if there will be some load management for him in some games that are probably considered less important. So against a UCF, against an Eastern Washington? Will Florida choose to ease off the gas on their 6th-year senior linebacker just to ensure his health and just kind of be wary of the miles that they're going to put on him? I think it's possible, and I'm hesitant to pick somebody who I have concerns about whether or not he will play at the fullest capacity out of an abundance of caution. And for that reason, I'm going with 2021's tackles leader. I am going to go Trey Dean. He recorded 92 tackles last year. I don't think that there's a reason he should record fewer this season. So I have him atop that category, pass breakups. Let's talk pass breakups. I think Dean is in contention here as well. Who are you going with in terms of who's the biggest menace for opposing quarterbacks?
I'm thinking Dean here in this regard. I think that he just has the opportunity. Obviously, Jason Marshall, I think, is a solid candidate as well, even Avery Helm. But I'm going to go with Trey Dean. He led Florida along with tackles in pass breakups last season. I think that he just is a very solid option, and I'm going to go with him. I think he has another really good season now that, back as the starting safety. This scheme, I think, is very favorable to him. Sometimes you'll see 6 defensive backs on the field at one time, and I think that Dean is going to capitalize on a lot of that stuff.
You and I are back on the same page. I think Dean gets it done here. I think that the challenge with picking a cornerback is that if a corner gets really good, right? So say Jason Marshall gets super hot, like just unstoppable. Teams are going to start to slow down on how much they're going to target wide receivers in his vicinity. Corners are easier to avoid if a guy gets hot or is just kind of too challenging to deal with, whereas a safety has a little bit more of that coverage freedom that could allow him to get closer to a higher volume of passes to defend. And for that reason, I'm going with Trey Dean for the pass breakups. We are in the home stretch of the prediction episode of the Swamp 247 podcast. We are now into the broad team categories. And this was a question that you posed to me before the show. I think it's interesting. Which freshman plays the most? I want to rephrase that, though, from how we worded it before the show. I'm thinking, who is the most impressive freshman? So is there somebody maybe who doesn't play as much as a different freshman, but makes more of an impact while he's on the field? That is the question I will now pose to you. Who is your preseason freshman standout projection?
Yeah, I think there are certainly a few here. Trey Smack is even one that we haven't really mentioned, the guy who could win the starting kicker battle. There certainly has been some clamor about Devin Moore, his potential. And even we wrote about this, Chris McClellan. I think that he will see a role in Florida's defensive line room. But I'm going to go with Shamar James. You alluded to some of the health concerns there with the linebackers, not just Ventrell Miller, but Amari Burney. Even though he said, we're recording this Tuesday, August 30th, even though he said yesterday on the 29th that he's fully healthy, I think that there are certainly some concerns about playing those guys the entirety of the game, like you said. And I think that Shamar James, from what he's done since getting on campus, that's a guy that I think he's, from what we've heard, is the most impressive of the freshmen. Billy Napier went ahead and called him exceptional, which you do not hear too much about many players, let alone a freshman. That's pretty high praise from someone who I think hasn't tried to say too much about what Florida is going to do. So I'm going to agree with Billy Napier, and I'm going to go with Shamar James. I think that he is going to be Florida's most impressive freshman.
I'm gonna keep on hammering home my predictions and my thoughts about Trevor Etienne. I have made this public over the last several weeks. I think that this is a guy who has immense potential, especially within this offense. I think Billy Napier sees that. I think a lot of his teammates see that. And so, very simply put, for the reasons I've already outlined in this show and others, I think Trevor Etienne is your 2022 freshman Florida standout. Who's the most underrated player on this roster, Graham? And this could be anybody: freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Positions don't matter. Who do you think is not getting as much credit as they deserve?
Oh wow, that's a very tough question. I kind of want to go with Jervon Dexter. I think that there are a lot of people who have the mentality that you've seen the best of this guy, or that he maybe, is prone to taking a few plays off. I don't get that sense at all. You've seen him, dominate in fall camp. You've heard from people inside the building that this is someone who has brought a new professional approach, is a lot more serious about a lot of the aspects, from diet to training to how they carry themselves on the field. And I would not be surprised if we are, like you said, eating crow here at the middle of the season about some of these categories, because Dexter is having such a dominant year and is leading the way in several of them. I wouldn't be surprised by that whatsoever. I think that he is someone who is underrated, and by the end of the year, I wouldn't be surprised if he was being talked about as this possible second, maybe a first round pick here in for the Gators after next year, going into next year.
I, right before I asked you the question of most underrated, thought that I was going to be all creative and I was going to have this big fancy thing to say about how fans might not understand why I'm going to name this player the most underrated, because Florida fans think he's so good. I was very excited about it. And then you said Gervon Dexter. That is the guy I was going to pick. And I think that for a Florida fan to hear underrated with Gervon Dexter's name in the same sentence, I think could be jarring. I think that, you hear this guy, there are people who have projected him into the first round. Florida media members have made it very clear throughout the spring and into fall camp that this is Florida's best defensive player. Just an uber talented guy. Florida's coaching staff has gushed about him. Sean Spencer has offered raving reviews for this sophomore defensive tackle, but he still doesn't feel like he's getting the recognition he deserves in my mind. Was not a first team all conference selection by the media in the preseason. And I think that kind of speaks more to the outside of the Gainesville bubble attitude towards Gervon Dexter. I think that people think he's good, but I don't think people view him as like really good, top of the defense caliber type of player. And so my pick of Gervon Dexter as the most underrated might not be a byproduct of the attitude towards him from Florida fans. I think for those listening to this and upset by the pick, it's not because of you. I think that Florida fans rate him just fine. This is for outside of Florida fandom, outside of Florida media perception of Gervon Dexter. I think that he does not get the national acclaim that he should be. And it brings me to my final category, and this is the one that I think gets people the most riled up. Give me a season prediction for Florida's record. How many games do they win in the SEC? Where are you going here? So perfect response would be overall wins and losses, and then give me conference wins and losses.
Oof, man. I am going to go with 7-5 for Florida. I do think that is not an indictment of the program whatsoever. I think it's a very tough schedule. We've talked about this conference. I'm going to go 3-5. And I think that is just that's a very impressive number, given how things stand, given the status of a lot of Florida opponents, Kentucky, Tennessee, obviously Georgia, and then going to Texas A&M, LSU having a very competent head coach, you name it. There's a lot of reasons why Florida easily could lose 6 SEC games, and I think that them winning 3 rather than only 2 would be an impressive year, even if it's just over the likes of Missouri, South Carolina, and Vanderbilt.
Let me ask you this question: with just 3 wins in SEC play, that's 8 of Florida's games. What is Florida's record in your? Or sorry, does Florida open its season then with a win over Utah? Because to get to 7 wins, the wins are going to have to come from somewhere. Do you have the Gators beating the Utes week 1?
I do think, the more I think about it, that it's very possible Florida beats Utah, and to be 7-5, yeah, like you said, they would have to beat Utah. And I wasn't really ready to come out here, Jacob, and sit here and say Florida fans were going to see their team go 500 this year and possibly have the same thing happen to them as last year, and kind of look like, in a sense, they were stuck in the mud. I mean, if you go 6-6 and then lose your bowl game, you're theoretically, if you care about that win-loss record, you're at the same place you started at the end of last year at 6-7. I do think a win over Utah in the swamp in front of 90,000 people when they don't really know what you're going to do, and you return a lot of talent from Brenton Cox to Ventrell Miller, guys who weren't healthy last year, and you get a dominant Javon Dexter and Anthony Richardson having prepared the full year. I think it is possible that Florida, at their healthiest potentially in the season opener, can beat a top 10 team that is having to come into their building. I think that absolutely that is doable. I think it would be very close. I think that they would have to rely, in a sense, on the elements, the fans, the weather, possibly a little rain that makes it very favorable to see which runner can gain the most ground. I do think it's possible that Florida beats Utah. But with all that said, 3 weeks ago, I predicted that Florida would lose to Utah 34-21 when I made my initial prediction. And that's a 13-point gap that is quite a big swing. I do think right now that game between Florida and Utah is 50-50 in my mind. I could see it going either way. And that means that it's 50-50 whether Florida has a 7-5 finish or a 6-6 finish. And the optics of that, I think the two are much different than what it's going to actually come down to, if that's going to make sense.
Sure. Well, you heard it here first, folks. Breaking news. Graham Hall, based on his record prediction, has Florida not only beating a top 10 team week 1, but going undefeated in non-con games this season. You have Florida being ranked second week of the year. If they come away with a win over number 7 Utah, that's a straight shot into the top 25. So big stuff here on the Swamp 247 podcast from Graham Hall. I will be a little bit more moderate in each direction. I think I agree with you on the overall wins and losses. I think Florida goes 7-5 this season, but I give it a little bit more credit in conference play. I think it's an even split, 4 wins, 4 losses. I think the losses come against Tennessee, Georgia, A&M, and then you can pick one more amongst the remaining games for a record of 4-4. I do not think Florida beats Utah week 1, but you and I will discuss that much more. This actually brings me to our closing portion of this podcast. Of course, thank you all for listening throughout this show. Again, drop your comments with some of these predictions. We'd love to hear what you have to say about what this Florida team will do. And make sure you keep an eye out for a lot more content. We have more position groups to still preview. Those will be going up throughout the next couple days leading up to the season opener on Saturday. I think we've got 3 more positions left: linebacker, secondary, and defensive line. We will have a Utah-specific podcast where we talk about the game, what fans can expect. That will be dropping on Thursday. Today is Tuesday, August 30th. So you're just a couple days away from that. And we have plenty of written content, too. Head on over to swamp247.com for all of our season preview content. We've got lots of it. Billy Napier had a press conference yesterday on Monday. He'll talk again tomorrow, Wednesday in the evening. Florida also expected to drop its depth chart ahead of its upcoming season. So lots to look forward to if you are a Florida fan, and we will have it covered for you over at swamp247.com. For Graham Hall, my name is Jacob Rudner. Thanking you for listening to this prediction episode for the upcoming 2022 Florida season. And we will see you on the next episode. We've got lots coming out soon. See you soon.